Okay. All right. Am I on? Is my mic on? Doesn't sound like it's on. Am I on? I just don't feel like I'm loud enough. Do you? There we go. Now I feel like I'm loud enough. So that's maybe too loud. Thanks, Joseph. Now he's being funny with the board. All right. How many of you remember when you're growing up, you lost a tooth and you put it under your pillow and you waited for the tooth fairy? And how many of you remember? How much did you get when you were growing up? How much did you get? A quarter? $1? $1? Yeah, I got a quarter. I was excited about a quarter, right? I was excited about that. And I was doing chapel time recently here at the school, and we had a group of kids there together, and there was one little girl named Rachel who had lost her tooth, and she was quite proud of losing her tooth, and she was showing everybody about how she lost her tooth. And then she pulled out $2, and she's like, $2 from the tooth fairy. And all the other kids were like, dang, she's got $2. And then Jessica stood up, and she showed off her missing tooth. And Jessica said, yeah, that's nothing. The tooth fairy brought me $10. I'm like, $10? And the little girl, little Rachel, looked at Jessica and said, can you tell me which tooth fairy your mom and dad are using? She wants the upgrade. She wants the upgrade from 2 to 10. Nothing sharpens sight like envy. Amen? Yes, yes. We're in this series on the faces of Jesus, and we've looked at two faces that Jesus had, the face of love, and then we talked about how Jesus last week was relaxed and peaceful. And the first week we looked at how love matters more than anything else. We talked about how, hey, if you win at love, you will not fail at life. And if you fail at love, you cannot win in life. Everything without love, Paul says in 1 Corinthians, is what? It is nothing. Nothing. So, and this last week we looked at how love is patient and how hurry is the great enemy of our day. And you can't love people in a hurry because you just overlook them. And last week everybody drove the speed limit. How many of you drove the speed limit last week? I had someone in the 9 o'clock say to me, someone in the 9 o'clock said, John, all week long I was going until Friday, and Friday I got a speeding ticket, my first one in 4 years. So we've been talking about how if you're patient, you're relaxed, you live unrushed, you're really loving and patient all the time. How many of you have been really patient this week? Anyone? Okay, a couple of you. Somebody said to me, impatience is so deeply rooted in my life. Can we have one more week to work on it? And of course the answer is no. We have to hurry up and keep going through the series. No. So Paul says love is patient, love is kind. And these are teachings from the most cherished, most often quoted, influential description of love in the history of humanity. Paul's letter to the church in Corinth, 1 Corinthians 13. And a lot of people think of these words as beautiful poetry that are meant to be read at weddings. And they think of these words as like something that are soft and fuzzy, and you see them on a Hallmark card, and aren't they sweet? But au contraire, I want to tell you, when Paul wrote these words to the church in Corinth, they did not receive them as warm and fuzzy. Okay? Again, this is a beautiful, what I call a lollipop passage of Scripture, right? The love chapter. Paul says words like, though I speak in tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I'm just a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. I'm just making noise. Though I have the gift of prophecy and can move mountains and fathom all mysteries, but do not have love, I'm nothing. Though I give away all I possess, all my possessions and my body to the fire and the flames, but have not love, I gain nothing. For love is patient, love is kind. And everybody at Corinth so far, when they're hearing this, are like, yeah, that's great. But then he's talking to a church in Corinth. He wrote these letters, and he's saying, your church is a mess. You are not loving. You're horrible. You're unloving. I'll put it this way. There's an old TV sitcom named Seinfeld. Anyone here ever watch Seinfeld? Yeah. And there was a character in there that was kind of my hero. He's a big loser, George Costanza, right? Everybody loves George Costanza, right? He's the guy that wears stretchy pants all the time, right? And he's such a loser, he realized one day, and there's one episode where his life is nothing like he wanted. He says, every decision I make is wrong. Every instinct is wrong. Every impulse is wrong. So he lands on a life strategy called do the opposite. And whatever he would normally do, he starts doing the opposite. And it works out great. Beautiful women suddenly start falling in love with him, even though he's living in a basement with his parents. He's got finances, everything from doing the opposite. So when Paul is preaching to the church in Corinth here, he's saying to them, you are the George Costanza of churches. You're the opposite of what love is supposed to be. In case anybody misses it, the next two items that he chewed out Corinth for is that they are self-seeking. And he even uses this term. He says you're egocentric and you dishonor each other because you're always ladder climbing. And then he says these words, love does not dishonor others. Love is not self-seeking. In other words, not just once, not just twice, but over 5 times, Paul says to this church in Corinth in this lollipop passage, love is not like you or you or you or you. 5 times he tells them, you're not like love. Okay? And he says this to them not because he doesn't love them, but in spite of the fact he loves them, he says, I don't want you to wallow in a miserable life. I want you to get this. And he doesn't want them to miss out on what matters most, which is growing into the people that God intended for them to be and the community and do it opposite the way the world works. Do you get this? It's a lot of setup, right? A lot of setup. Are you still with me? Amen? And so Paul's going to say, hey, don't be like the world. Do the opposite. That's Jesus' message. Do the opposite. So for the rest of this talk, I want to focus on a very specific part of this message. It's a knot. It says, love does not, what, church? Envy. And here's why. Because envy in many ways is not just a sin. It's kind of the opposite of love. A person of love actually feels enhanced by the well-being of others. A person of envy feels diminished by the well-being of others, right? When I love somebody, I want to build them up. When I envy somebody, I compare myself to them, and I want them to be torn down. I want to outdo them. I want to feel better because I am better than you. One of my favorites comes out of Hollywood. How many actors does it take to change a light bulb? Any guesses? 100. 100. 1 to change the bulb and 99 to say, I could have done that. Thank you, front row, for laughing. As someone said, I love this quote, after a person makes his mark in this world, a lot of people begin showing up with erasers. Yes, yes. So whenever a person's envious of another, you can be sure that that individual has never fully recognized and accepted his or her own gifts. Envy comes from low self-esteem, fears, insecurities, and not accepting your place that God has given to you. But I want to tell you, envy can creep up on you and can sneak up on you. And like this week, I'm writing the message on envy. I go home to my beautiful baby doll who's on summer break because she's a school teacher. God bless her. I love the summers because my wife is back. She's relaxed. She's refreshed. There's food on the table. My slippers are ready. Okay, now I'm exaggerating, but you know what I'm saying. Okay, it's a nice thought. But anyway, so she's just chilling out on the couch, eating bonbons, watching a show that you should not watch because it creates envy. And I'll give you the name of the channel you should not watch. HGTV. Do not watch this channel. You will have envy. I'm in my house. I think it's a nice house. I'm watching HGTV. It doesn't look nice anymore. We introduce you on our new show on House Hunters to Jane and Billy. Jane wants a move-in ready. Billy wants a fixer-upper in Denver, Colorado. Their budget is $1.8 million. $1.8 million, you know, a fixer-upper? People should be mowing your yard. You look around at your house as you're looking at the 3 houses they're looking at for $1.8 million, and you're like, my house could fit in their closet. And suddenly you have envy. So I said, Renee, don't watch this show. It causes envy. You're suddenly unhappy with our house. Our house is great. I like our house. So I come home the next day. Does she listen to me? No. It gets worse. She's not watching House Hunters. She's watching a show called Island Hunters. What the heck? What? Island Hunters? What? What? This couple, for real, they're looking for their own island in Belize, which sounds great until you hear their budget. $4.5 million. Who goes down to Belize with $5 million in their pocket going, I think I'll take that island over there? Crazy. The kids were in the pool when mom and dad are making the decision on which island they want to buy. And the dad's like, kids, do you want an island? Yeah. Spoiled little. I want to say it, but I won't. And I'm like, and suddenly I found myself going, I want to buy an island. Why can't I buy an island? I don't even own my house I'm in. The bank does. And the city. All the taxes they like to charge me. I'm sorry. I saw this definition on Facebook. Someone sent this to me. I love this. Don't let your ice cream melt while you're counting someone else's sprinkles. True. Envy is the art of counting other people's blessings instead of your own. It's thinking I need an island instead of being happy with my house. It comes from this irrational idea that I've got to be loved equally by all people and I've got to be equal to all people. I first learned about envy when I was just a child. I read a little tale. Remember this Snow White? Remember Snow White? Snow White's about envy, right? There was the evil stepmother, and what did she say to the mirror? What did she say, church? Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest? I can't get an amen, but I get Snow White like you wouldn't believe. Bunch of heathens. Come on. As long as the stepmother remained the most beautiful and youthful, the mirror always said, oh, you are. But when the day came when she said Snow White, it was over, right? Envy, the queen flushed green with envy. Envy turns into hatred and murderous plans. Likewise, envy eventually leads to 10 brothers wanting to kill Joseph because he's got that special coat, right? And he's the favorite. Our envy always lasts longer than the happiness of those we envy. I think that's true. Proverbs says it this way, Proverbs 14:30, a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. Now, here's the funny thing. You can't really get rid of envy by saying, I'm going to try really hard not to envy. That's not a way of spiritual transformation. Envy can only be gotten rid of as it's replaced with the power of love. When love is present, there's just no room for envy to grow. This is why John Wesley would say things like, Lord, fill up my heart with your love so much so that there's no more room for sin. So the place to begin is ruthless honesty. How many of you have ever here wrestled with envy? Anyone? Okay, a few of you. Most of you have defeated it, so this sermon is not for you. That's wonderful. I'm happy that you're still here. So here's the thing. Research shows that most people don't compare yourselves to island shoppers or to people who live in Hollywood with lots of fame and movies. Most of the times we envy ourselves compared to people that are close to us. And you may have not, most of you in this room, by the show of your hands, have clearly defeated envy, or you're clearly lying. I'm not sure which one. But anyway, I have a rich history of envy. I have a rich history of it, and I'm quite proud of this. I will tell you, I came up with a list just for your own amusement. I'm going to list off all the people I've ever been envious of, and it took me about 30 seconds to create this list. It was not difficult at all. So are you ready? All right, so here we go. People I've been envious of. People who are more athletic than me. People who are smarter than me. Guys who are better looking than me. Who had cuter girlfriends than me. Actually just had a girlfriend. Weightlifters, for obvious reasons, okay. Football players, musicians, people who are more extroverted than me. Can you imagine that? People who are better pastors, better speakers, better writers, better leaders than me. Parents of perfect families with their perfect children, their perfect pets who go on perfect vacations and buy perfect islands and move from success to sex. And people who get tan, people who are great at confrontation, people who never use pouting or silent treatment in their marriage. People who are more articulate, movers and shakers with perfect hair and perfect resumes and perfect clothes and seem to do it all effortlessly. People who never break a sweat, people who have it all together. I could keep going. If you're here today and you don't have a problem with envy, I actually envy you. Because I'm puffed up and I'm boastful. I try to disguise it and make it look holy, but I was talking to my sister this last week. I was talking to her about someone, a person in my profession who's very well known and who I know some things about that the general public does not know about. And I think this person is not a really good person. But they're very successful, and they have a big church, and they're really great. And I know they're not really moral, but they put on a good show. And so I was telling my sister this, and she's like, this is my sister's comment, the Sarge, the one I really love. I do love her, but, she's a Sarge. She says this, John, I have found that when I feel judgmental towards someone, it's usually because I envy them. Underneath all my judgment is just envy. So maybe you need to look at that in your own heart. My response, I'm sorry, Sherry, I don't remember asking for your opinion. I was just kind of talking. Have you ever had family members share their opinion when you never asked for it? Happens quite a bit. So when Paul talks about envy here and says love does not envy, he's not saying do this or don't do this. He's actually just describing what love is. Envy is the opposite of love in a way that even most other sins are not. One of the faces that Jesus never wore is the face of envy. He wore the face of contentment. He was content. Now you think about this with the gifts that God had given him and even the life that God had chosen him, even though that he could never know the joy of marrying another person, of building a life with another person, or having children, or having a 401k, or retiring. I mean, all those things. You think about Jesus gave up all those things. And it's just amazing when you think about it, he was content with that. And live with that. So greed is a sin, right? I might be greedy. I may want just as much money as you have. But if I envy you, I don't just want you to have more. If I envy you, I want you to have less money. I want you to be diminished. I want something bad to be true of you. Samuel Roberts, 19th century British poet. Historical detail. The Duke was there. There was a gathering of people all around the Duke, and they were praising the Duke because the Duke's good looking, and he's got talent, and he's got wealth, and he's got enormous promise, and he's young. In a brief pause, Robert said this has actually happened. He said, "Thank God he has bad teeth." That's envy. If you have everything else, I hope you have bad teeth. I hope you have bad something. The wrong kind of competitiveness creeps in so quickly. Again, we're in this series on love, and I'm thinking about what would it be for our church to be the most loving church. No kidding. My first thought was I should make it a goal. I should come out and say, our number one goal here at Grace is to be the most loving church in the world. But then, of course, we'd have to do what? Compare ourselves to other churches. And then be envious. Maybe. Envy is such a sneaky thing. There's a researcher named Alexandria Samuel, and she's documented the impact of social media on envy. And you can imagine where this is going. Because now we have more access to more successes by more people like us than ever before. Right? In history. Right? And people all recording their triumphs. Like, I'm going to pick on a family here, and they have no idea that I'm going to pick on it. But I'm on their Facebook feed. And this is just kind of spontaneous. It's not notes, so I could get in trouble. So if they never come back, it's my fault. But the Risley family is here today, and they went on a vacation to Thailand. And I had envy. Because they're doing beautiful blue waters. They're riding on top of elephants. I mean, they're filming all this. I had envy until they did something really weird. They went into a cage with tigers. And they're petting tigers. Who does this sort of thing? I love what Miriam said. Where's Miriam? I love what Miriam said. But I won't say that out loud, Miriam. But see Miriam for her comment on your tiger petting. Anyway, it was really funny. No, can I share it, Miriam? No? It's just so funny.
I got to share it, Miriam, because look, Miriam, I know your heart. This is Miriam. John, I think that's just something white people do. Crazy white people. Only crazy white people go into a cage and pet a tiger that could kill you. So I was envious of your vacation until you were petting tigers. That's where I draw the line. And we saw the video where the tiger growled at you, Miles, and you jumped back. I would have been out of the cage. It would have been like, I've been with the Mexican people just watching. Yeah, there's some more dumb white people in the cage, yeah. If the Rizzlies never come back now, you know why. I'm picking on them. But looked like a great vacation in Thailand. Looked like you had a lot of fun. Until then, another thing, you were eating snake soup. I'm out on that one too. I'm out. Anyway, the more time people spend on social media, the more envy they experience. Envy is such a miserable thing, and yet we do it to ourselves. At the same time, envy is so old and is so central that the first time that the word sin is mentioned in the Bible, it's the story of envy. It goes so deep. It's the opposite of love. You remember there were two brothers, Cain and Abel. God created family to love each other. But Cain did not love his little brother. We're told in this very compact passage that they bring offerings to God. And Abel brings his best, right, to God. And Cain is kind of just going through the motions. So Abel had spiritual intimacy with God and favor with God, but Cain did not, and that was painful for Cain. But that pain did not prompt Cain to say, hey, I need to look in the inside and figure out my relationship with God, because Abel has a good one. No, he looks at Abel, and every time he looks at Abel, he feels envy. And finally he asks himself this question, hey, what if there was no Abel? What if I just eliminate Abel? God tries to help. It's such a powerful passage. God actually says to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you don't do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. In John Steinbeck's book, East of Eden, which is a retelling of the story of Cain and Abel, there's a fabulous passage where there's ancient Chinese scholars discover this passage, and they pore over it, and they finally come to the conclusion that there is actually a great offer to the human race. And they conclude, sin is crouching at your door. It's like a beast. It's like a living thing that wants you, but you can rule over it. It's not inevitable. It's possible. God gives us freedom. And he poses questions to Cain. Why are you angry? Why are you downcast? And Cain is silent. If Cain had answered God, if he had said, hey, I'm just jealous of Abel, if he confessed it to himself and to his brother, he could have been saved. But his silence is what dooms him. Envy destroys his soul and his brother. And God says in this unspeakably poignant passage, he says after Cain has killed Abel, the blood of your brother cries out to me from the ground. You think about the heart of God. Of course, God made the ground and loved the ground, and God made God's children. And he's been receiving that blood for a long time. And I think about every time blood is spilled, how God must hurt, because the ground wasn't meant to receive our blood. From Cain and Abel, a green thread of envy runs throughout the whole Bible. If you know the Bible, you'll know some of these stories. Abraham and Sarah, right? They're promised children, and Sarah's old and Abraham's old, and they're not given children quick enough. 26 years they have to wait. And so Sarah finally says to Abraham one day, hey, go sleep with Hagar. Maybe she'll give you a child. And he's a typical guy. Okay. He just goes. That sounds good. He just goes, right? And so he goes and they create a child, and Ishmael comes. And Sarah sees Ishmael, and she is envious that this woman has brought forth a child, and she's barren. And so she says, cast them out. And so Abraham does. And God says, no, I'm going to make a nation out of them. And that became what? The nation of Islam. Yes, the Muslim nation. And then Jacob and Esau and Leah and Rachel and Joseph and his brothers and Miriam and Aaron are jealous of their brother Moses. And Ahab covets Naboth's vineyard. All throughout Scripture, envy. Paul says some people preach out of envy. One day, though, a man named Jesus started this community where his plan was to do the opposite of envy. Jesus never wore the face of envy.
Of course, the people who were following Jesus didn't know about that. You remember Jesus' disciples, James and John, the sons of thunder. What a name, right? They come up to him one day and they say, hey, Jesus, when you get to the kingdom, can, one of us sit on your left and one of us sit on the right? Can we be VIPs in the kingdom? And in the Gospel of Matthew, we're actually told that they had their mommy go ask him, can our son sit to the right and left? And Jesus says to them, hey, can you drink the cup? And they're like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. And the other 10 disciples hear about this, and they're furious, not because of what James and John asked, and not because they asked something wrong. It's because they had thought of it first, and they wanted to be the one sitting by the right and the left. They're envious. Jesus says, hey, guys, he gives them a little speech. You know the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, but not with you. Instead, whoever wants to be great must become what, church? A servant. Whoever wants to be made first must be last. Who teaches that? That's the opposite. Not Corinth, not Rome. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, great people do that, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. In other words, Jesus says, hey guys, here's the plan. Do the opposite of what the culture does. Your every instinct is wrong. It's not working well for our earth. The blood of every brother and sister cries out from the ground. So let's do something opposite. Let's make our lives a joyful exercise in trying to serve and enhance and equip and bless the lives of other people. So again, I want to say this one more time because I don't want you leaving here going, I'm going to really, really try hard to stop envying. That's not how you do it. Spiritual maturity is not envy management. Right? It's not through gritted teeth and repressing and stifling feelings and be like, oh, I'm so miserable, but I'm not envious. The point is, whenever love is present, there's no room for envy to grow. It has to put down deep roots in the human heart. But a loving heart has no place for envy to get rooted. I'll give you an example of this. When we were in Missouri, I encouraged Jacob to give a little sermon to the congregation. And he gave a little mini message on one of the evening services. They had a Tuesday night service there. And afterwards, somebody came up and said to me, your son gave a wonderful sermon. And you know what I said? I said, thank you. Now, why did I say that? I didn't write the sermon. I didn't deliver the sermon. It had nothing to do with me. I have such a bond with Jacob, my son. He's like family. He's my son. I identify with him in a way that when he wins, I feel like I win. When he does well, I feel like I do well. And then another person came up after Jacob spoke and said, we really wish we could hear him speak more often. In fact, I think I'd rather hear him than you. He's certainly shorter than you. And that actually made me happy inside because I loved him, because he's my family. And if everybody were in my family, I would be enhanced by the well-being of everybody. I would not be diminished or envious of anybody. That's kind of the plan. One family. It's not that we try really hard not to envy. It's just that envy is uprooted by love. You could think of it like this. There are some people that you might call that are in my circle of oneness, right? Could be family, really close friends. I admire a lot. People in deep ways we're one. They do well, I automatically rejoice. They suffer, I suffer. They do well, I do well. But there's also an opposite circle, might be called the circle of rivals. With them, it's opposite. If they do well, I feel diminished. If they go south and have problems, I feel a little better about myself. Jesus' plan is actually to take those people who are currently in your circle of rivals and bring them into your circle of oneness. One family. And that's why Paul would say things like this. Hey, there's not Jew or Gentile, slave nor free. There's not even male or female. For you're all what, church? You're all one in Christ Jesus. It's that simple. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy. So don't look at other people in your life as rivals for you to outdo. Just practice with God's help looking at people in your life as people that Jesus looked at and loved. And say, how can I help them? To whom can I show kindness to this week? I found the number one thing that I love to say to people now, and I just think it's such a helpful thing to say to people, and you have to be prepared to act on it, is you say to people, how can I help? How can I help? People, if they take that seriously, you can help them. There's a family therapist named Jim Roberts, no relation to me.
But he was visiting his 4th grade class when a teacher initiated a game, and the game was called Balloon Stomp. Simple game. Each child had a balloon tied to their leg, and the object of the game was to protect your balloon, keep it from popping, while trying to stomp on and pop everybody else's balloon. It's a very Darwinian game. It's a very survival of the fittest. Every man and woman for themselves, except for a few timid souls who knew, there were a few classmates who knew they could never win this game, and they actually went over and committed balloon suicide and popped their own balloons first. The whole game in the class was actually over quite quickly because the biggest, toughest, strongest, meanest kid ended up winning. Then a disturbing thing happened. Another class. This one was a class with kids who had intellectual disabilities. And they were brought in to play the game. Balloons were tied to their legs, instructions were read to them, and Jim Roberts said he started to get a sick feeling in his stomach because he thought he was about to see something he didn't want to see. But then he said the strangest thing happened. The kids who were intellectually disabled and a little bit slower understood the idea that the balloons were to be popped. But they got the whole dog-eat-dog thing wrong. They did the opposite. They went about methodically, joyfully, happily helping each other pop each other's balloons. One little girl carefully held her balloon while another little boy stomped on it. And then he held his balloon while she stomped on it, and she got her turn. When the last balloon was popped, everybody clapped. Everybody cheered. Everybody won. They did the opposite of what the culture teaches. So which game are you going to play this week? How are you going to keep score? I think Jesus would say, the way you keep score is to say, how many people can I help this week? Just that. Who could I encourage to shine? Who could I thank or compliment or recognize? Who could I brag about behind their back? Think about that. How many times have you bragged about someone behind their back? Right? I mean, is your name safe in everyone's mouth? Think about that. And if you struggle with envy, the first thing the scripture says is confess it as a sin. Cain didn't confess it. James 3:14 says, if you harbor, this is the brother of Jesus, if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Confess it. Give it to God. Give it to your partner in prayer that helps you spiritually. Accountability partner. Number 2, accept your calling. Count your blessings. The book of Acts says, from one man God made every nation of men and women that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he determined the time set for them in the exact places where they should live. Acts 17:26. I used to be envious of T.J. Jakes. You ever seen him? African-American preacher, great preacher. And he's got this voice that sounds like it's the voice of God. And I listen to my voice, and I'm like, that doesn't sound like God at all. Sounds like John. But I got to be happy because God's only going to ask me, what did you do with your gifts? Not what did you do with someone else's gifts. So be happy and accept your calling. When I'm jealous of those who are elevated above me, or promoted rather than me, more popular, I find that I'm really angry with God. I'm saying, God, I deserve what they have. And you're refusing to look at the gifts that God has given you. So when you're envious, realize your argument might be with God, not with you. Envy comes from people's ignorance or lack of belief in their own gift. Envy is a symptom of a lack of appreciation of our own uniqueness and self-worth. Everyone in this room has something unique to give that no one else can give. Every one of you is a puzzle, a piece of that puzzle that none of us else can fit. I really believe that. And that's true of the church community, especially true. So next time you feel envy, count your blessings, turn off HGTV, get off Facebook, get off Instagram, and be glad that you live better than 2/3 of the world. Because you do. Better than kings. You can go over to your fridge and open up a freezer. Third, just to make it really concrete, pray for your competitor to shine.
A competitor is anybody you compare yourself to. You see their success, their blessing, and it automatically galls you. You feel inferior or jealous, so you want to do better than they. This week, identify someone who's a competitor like that and commit to praying for them to flourish. Now, you may feel like you don't want them to flourish. You can't control feelings. The great thing about prayer is I can control who I pray for. And I found the strangest thing. This is true. There was a girl in seminary. I graduated from SMU. I was a presidential scholar. They thought I was smart. And I thought I should graduate at the number one top of the class, 65 students. And I was well on my way to doing that until a girl transferred into SMU. And her name was Kim, and she was a lawyer, which made it worse. Because lawyers that came to seminary felt a lot of guilt. And they had already made a crap ton of money, and now they were free to pursue a career that they really loved. And so I'd always say to her, you feeling guilty? Feeling guilty for all that money you made as a lawyer? She's like, no, not at all. When she got a 94, I got a 93. I get a 95, she got a 96. And she would always go, what'd you get? I'd be like, 95. Oh, 97. I hated Kim. And one of my teachers picked up on it, and they said, why don't you start praying for Kim? And so I did, and I prayed for Kim. She still graduated ahead of me, and I'm okay with it mostly. There was a guy ahead of me on the racquetball team at SMU. I played on the racquetball team, a club team, and he became my rival. I realized instead of wishing he would fail, I could actually pray that he would soar, and it actually felt good. After Renee and I had our summer loving experience and we dated for a summer, she went to another school miles away, and I found out she was dating another guy, and a guy named Stephen Ostendorf, who today is a preacher. I'm not really sure what this means for Renee. Apparently she had the hots for holy men. I'm not really sure. But anyway, she started dating him after our summer loving, and I was like, okay, and he was my rival. I didn't really like him. And then I realized instead of wishing or praying that he could fail, I could pray that he would fail, and I did, and it felt really good because he did fail. All right, anyway. So sometimes when you pray for people, it's just interesting how it goes. So this week, in all seriousness, just full transparency, pray for your competitor to shine and ask God to replace that toxic weed of envy with the flower of love. That's the plan. That's the community Jesus came to start. And again, I want to end this with a word about the cross and envy. Because on the human level, envy is why the cross happened. Pilate, we're told, saw that it was out of envy that the chief priest handed Jesus over to him. The chief priests were jealous of Jesus' following and what he was doing in the religious community. The religious community could not compete with Jesus. It's tough to compete with Jesus. We've got miracles over here. We've got teaching over here. Where are you going to go? Miracles. So they were envious. Jesus was loved and followed. He had charisma, power, and authority. He could heal. He could teach. Religious leaders, people like me, took no joy in him but felt diminished. In their envy, the religious leaders formed a plan to kill him, but they technically couldn't kill him. So they said, we'll hand him over to the Romans and say he's an insurrectionist, and they'll kill him because we can't kill people. But Jesus' plan was to destroy envy. Jesus decided, I'll be the object of the worst that envy can do. I'll put myself in the place of Abel. It will be my blood that will spilled. But when your envy is spent, I'll still be loving you. I'll ask God to forgive. And this very cross where you think you're defeating me is where I'll be defeating envy by the power of love, holy love. It's amazing. Jesus did not do what anybody else would do. Jesus did not protect himself. He did the opposite. He did not avenge himself. He did the opposite. This was his whole life. God became flesh, king in a manger, savior on a cross. This whole story, the whole message of the Bible is just the opposite. He was crucified, lifted up, came into his kingdom with one condemned man on his right and one on his left. Can you drink the cup? Envy claimed one more victim. And he was died and he was buried. And normally the earth keeps his dead. Normally their blood cries out from the ground. But on the third day, the earth did the opposite. The tomb was empty and love triumphed. Now you and I are invited into this circle of oneness at great cost. We don't have to be puffed up. We're loved. We have our place.